Preacher told me last Sunday morning, son, you better start living right. You need to quit the women and the whiskey and carrying on all night. Don't you want to hear him call your name when you're standing at the pearly gates? I told the preacher, yes, I do, but I hope they don't call today. I ain't ready. Everybody wants to go to heaven, have a mansion high above the clouds. Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to go now. I said, preacher, maybe you didn't see me throw an extra 20 in the plate. There's one for everything I did last night and one to get me through today. Here's a 10 to help you remember next time you have the good Lord's ear. Say, I'm coming there, but ain't no hurry. I'm having fun down here. Don't you know, everybody wants to go to heaven, get their wings and fly around. Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to go now. Someday I want to see those streets of gold in my halo, but I wouldn't mind waiting at least 100 years or so. Everybody wants to go to heaven. It beats the other place, there ain't no doubt. Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to go now. These words are from the great theologian Kenny Chesney. And our text from Revelation today is not a vision of heaven, although you might think it is. I'm not really sure what you would call it. We are told in the first verse of chapter 21 that the author sees a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth have passed away. A new earth is understandable. This one's got all kinds of problems. But why do we need a new heaven? What's wrong with the heaven we've already got? And then he sees a new Jerusalem descending from the new heaven to the new earth. And the New Jerusalem includes many of the details that we associate with our popular imagination of heaven, including streets of gold and pearly gates. Although the pearly gates that are actually described in the text are 12, because the New Jerusalem is like a giant cube, and there are 12 pearly gates around the cube, and each gate is envisioned as a single pearl with a tunnel through it. Which is not what you usually think of, right? You usually think of the golden gates with pearl inlay. But no, now you have to think of a giant pearl. St. Peter standing in front of a giant pearl with a tunnel through it. You don't have to think about that. But the line from this chapter that I think may be the most memorable is in verse 4. God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. There will be no more mourning or crying or pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. It's a beautiful sentiment, and we often hear it read at funerals. But the question I have as I read that verse is, do we really want that? Do we really want a world with no death? Do we want to live forever? Maybe it depends on the conditions. One condition we might want to know is, if there is no death for anyone, are new people still being born? Is this place with no death going to be a place where there's still new life coming into the world? Or are there no new babies in this place? Having new babies coming into the world sounds great, but it also could get kind of crowded after a while if nobody's dying. And what about animals and plants? Are they going to die? And if not, what are we going to eat? In a similar vein, are we going to age in this vision? Are we somehow going to grow in wisdom and maturity, but not in years? And is that even possible? Because it seems like wisdom only happens when we experience hardship. We only gain wisdom from our suffering. Another question we might ask is, who is there with us? Ideally, we want all the people we love and none of the people we don't. If either of those conditions are untrue, would we want to live forever? Would we want to live forever without our loved ones? No. Would we want to live forever with the people who make our lives miserable today? The quote comes to mind that's often attributed to Mark Twain, but it's actually Clarence Darrow. I have never wished a man dead, but I have read some obituaries with great pleasure. In other words, when it comes to immortality, the devil is in the details. And of course, the sentiment of the text is probably what's really important, not all of these silly questions and literal interpretations. And the sentiment of the text is this desire to take away the pain of living and dying, and perhaps especially the pain that death brings to those who remain alive. Losing loved ones is painful. Grief sucks. So the sentiment, no more death and wipe every tear away, is understandable. But I suggest this, and it's not a helpful suggestion in the midst of intense grief. But if we have the space to consider it, I suggest that death is not something we want to live without. That death is not only a necessary part of life, but it's a gift. The reality of death, the knowledge that we are going to die, makes life worth living. And this is even true when death comes too young. And that's a really hard one, because I bet many of us would accept mortality and say, yes, we're all mortal, and that's acceptable, that's okay. But we would still even wish that nobody would die young, that no parent would ever bury their children. And yet at the same time, not knowing when we will die, not knowing how long we have, not knowing how long our loved ones have, not knowing if it's the last time we're going to see someone, that's all part of the gift. It's all part of this precious, awful gift of mortality. Again, not a gift we can probably appreciate in the depths of our grieving or in the crisis of loss, but when we have moments to breathe and space to reflect on how we want to live, on how we're going to treat each other, on how we're going to cherish those we love, we see that mortality is the only way. You know, in the biblical story of the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve are created mortal. Sometimes people think that they became mortal after they ate the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, but that's not quite right. They were created mortal. They were mortal from the beginning, and only after they attained the ability to know good and evil from eating that tree did God cast them out of the garden so that they wouldn't eat from the tree of life and therefore live forever. I wonder what would have happened if they had eaten from the tree of life first, which actually wasn't forbidden to them. Then they would have attained immortality, but not known good and evil. So what is eternal bliss if you don't know that it's bliss? The possibility of loss creates value. Mortality is the only way to know goodness. In Revelation's vision of a new heaven and a new earth, the tree of life from the Garden of Eden reappears. Now it's in the middle of the New Jerusalem, near the throne of God, with a river of life flowing through it. But it no longer offers fruit that gives eternal life. Instead, it offers leaves that heal wounds. The tree of life is no longer for avoiding our death, but for easing our suffering. It's now a comfort in our loss. I find especially helpful when I think of grieving the image of a circle with a hole in it. And the circle represents us, represents our whole life, all of our relationships, everything that we as an individual are. And then when somebody we love dies, a hole is torn out from the inside of the circle. And healing from that loss is not about the hole getting smaller and smaller till it disappears. The hole never goes away. The hole never changes size. Healing is about expanding the circle of our lives as we go on living. Healing is about our continuing to live and to grow so that the circle expands, that is us, while the hole of loss remains the same size. In other words, the loss doesn't change, but our relationship to the loss does as we go on living. A few years ago, we lost my 19-year-old niece to brain cancer. She died in her home, surrounded by her family, a day short of her 20th birthday. My brother and sister-in-law have been inspirations to me as they have grieved the loss of their only child. They are exemplars of grieving well. They have each done so differently. My sister-in-law grieves very publicly, posting often on Facebook about how she's feeling at any given time, her memories of Abby. She's never ashamed, always honest, always vulnerable. She posts lots of pictures. She posts memes and poems about grieving that she finds meaningful. Whenever they go to visit the grave, we always get pictures of the grave that they take care of with pictures and flowers. My brother posts less often, but when he does, he writes longer reflections on something he has read or experienced. And sometimes he shares what he and Lourdes call Abby sightings. Abby sightings are moments when they feel Abby's presence or sense her, or something meaningful happens that reminds them of her when they catch her spirit in a given moment. They had an Abby sighting the last time they visited us in California. They live on the East Coast. After Abby died, I agreed to take care of an orchid that the hospice nurse had brought and that was in Abby's room when she died. It was, of course, blooming and beautiful at the time. So I took it home, and the bloom remained for a long time, like a month or two. Finally, it fell away. So it was just the orchid with, an orchid plant with no flowers, just these sort of humble little leaves. And then we moved out here. And we brought the orchid with us across the country. We couldn't put it in the moving truck, of course. And so on the top of all of our junk in our packed up car, we sort of perched this orchid on top. And I think it had a very wonderful view of the country as we drove across it. And then when we got here, it did start to send up a new stalk. And then George and Lourdes came to visit. And it bloomed when they were here visiting. An Abby sighting. This is the last in the series on Revelation, and I wonder if the way we've talked about reading this book applies to death as well as politics. We have talked about reading Revelation as symbolism that reveals a deeper reality, a spiritual reality, a truth beneath the surface of what we ordinarily perceive. Maybe this vision of no death, then, is also not about a time in the future when there is literally no more death, but it invites us to approach death differently in this life. It invites us to see that the people we love are always with us. Even after their physical body has left, there is a spiritual reality, their spiritual presence with us just beneath the surface. So with that in mind, I'm going to close with a poem by the late Andrea Gibson. Andrea died just last month in her early 50s after a long battle with cancer. If you haven't read her poetry, I encourage you to Google it. She writes this: "My love, I was so wrong. Dying is the opposite of leaving. When I left my body, I did not go away. That portal of light was not a portal to elsewhere, but a portal to here. I am more here than I ever was before. I am more with you than I ever could have imagined. So close that you look past me when wondering where I am. It's okay. I know that to be human is to be farsighted. But feel me now, walking the chambers of your heart, pressing my palms to the soft walls of your living. Why did no one tell us that to die is to be reincarnated as those we love while they are still alive? Ask me the altitude of heaven, and I will answer, how tall are you? In my back pocket is a love note with every word you wish you'd said. At night, I sit ecstatic at the loom, weaving forgiveness into our worldly regrets. All day, I listen to the radio of your memories. Yes, I know every secret you thought too dark to tell me, and love you more for everything you feared might make me love you less. When you cry, I guide your tears toward the garden of kisses I once planted on your cheek, so you know they are perennials. Forgive me for not being able to weep with you. One day you will understand. One day you will know why I read the poetry of your grief to those waiting to be born, and they are all the more excited. There is nothing I want for now that we are so close. I open the curtain of your eyelids every morning with my smile. I wish you could see the beauty your spirit is right now making of your pain, your deep-seated fears playing musical chairs, laughing about how real they are not. My love, I want to sing it through the rafters of your bones. Dying is the opposite of leaving. I want to echo it through the corridor of your temples. I am more with you now than I ever was before. Do you understand? It was me who beckoned the stranger, who caught you in her arms when you forgot to not order for two at the coffee shop. It was me who was up all night gathering sunflowers into your chest, the last day you feared you would never wake again feeling lighthearted. I know it's hard to believe, but I promise it's the truth. I promise one day you will say it too. I can't believe I ever thought I could lose you. Now, would we trade all of this wisdom and spiritual insight and experience to have our loved ones with us physically again? Of course, we're human. But should we wish for a world where death is no more? Maybe we already have one. Maybe God isn't just wiping those tears from our eyes. Maybe God is guiding those tears toward the garden of kisses our loved ones planted on our cheeks so we know they are perennials. One day you will know why I read the poetry of your grief to those waiting to be born, and they are all the more excited. Amen.